So this is Stig of the Dump, Chapter 2, Digging with Stig, Part 2. We finished off before with, "Been stigging, Stig?" he asked, pointing to the dumps, and Stig grinned and nodded. It was gloomy and overhung at Stig's end of the pit, even on this bright day, and the den itself, now that the hole in the roof was mended, was even darker. The teapot lamp was flickering and throwing a dim light on the den and the place where Stig had been digging, but was not very cheerful. Come to think of it, thought Barney, rabbits and things that live in holes don't have any light at all. Not much fun for them then, with no windows. Couldn't he find some windows for Stig? What made it worse was that Stig had started a small fire in that den part. He must have just done it because Barney had not noticed any smoke when he was sitting on the tree trunk. The smoke was filling the den, and there was no way out for it except to trickle through the gaps in the roof. It made Barney's eyes water, but he supposed it was just one of those things you had to put up with, a bit like nettles. All the same, the place could do with a chimney as well as windows. He began to get used to the darkness, and he could see that the tunnel at the back of the cave went further back into the chalk than he'd noticed. The digging tools were lying about, the bedstead leg, the broken cast-iron shoe scraper, and an iron bar like the one he'd seen his father use on the jack to lift the car up. Stig was reaching up to offer Barney another turnip, but Barney didn't feel like turnip just after breakfast. "Can I help you dig, Stig?" he asked. "I expect you're busy anyhow." And he went to the end of the tunnel and picked up a bit of the bedstead, began to attack the wall of chalk. It was not as easy as he'd expected. The chalk in the inside of the hill there was firm, not crumbly as it was on the outside where the rain got at it. Barney's bashes with the awkward piece of metal only broke off smallish chips of chalk, and he was soon puffed out. Stig, who'd been standing watching him, took the digger from his hands and showed him how to dig out a hollow at the bottom of the chalk wall. Then knocked down the large chunks which came away easily because they were not held up underneath. There was soon a pile of loose chalk. Barney picked it up with his hands and put it in the small tin bath. When it was full, as much as he could When it was full, it was about as much as he could do to drag it along the floor of the cave towards the entrance. Stig helped him, and between them they lugged the load out of the den and dumped it. But Barney noticed that Stig took care to put some away from his door. He supposed that piles of new white chalk would let people know that something was going on. He let Stig dig next time. He soon got the hang of cutting under and letting it tumble down from the top. Now and then they would come to a great big flint embedded in the chalk like a fossil monster with knobs and bulges, and they would have to chip around it, worry it, and loosen it like a tooth until at last it came free, usually bringing down a lot of chalk with it. They worked on happily for a time, taking it in turns to dig and load, and now again then they would take a break for a drink of water from the tin or eat a refreshing apple. Barney's jeans were white with chalk dust and his hair and nails were full of it. He suddenly wondered what Grandma would say. Then he wondered what time it was. In spite of the apples, his tummy was telling him that it might be dinner time. You haven't got a clothes brush, have you, Stig?" he asked. Stig looked blank, and Barney decided that he probably hadn't. His eye fell on Stig's water pipe. Someone had thrown away the vacuum cleaner, so there must be one of the brush things somewhere. Sure enough, he spied one, fixed as a sort of T-piece on the end of a long thin pole that was helping to hold the roof up. He thought the roof might hold itself up for a bit while he got the worst of the chalk dust off with the vacuum cleaner end, and it did. Stig was watching with a puzzled look. wondering why Barney should be pulling down part of his roof to brush his clothes. "You're lucky, Stig," said Barney. "Nobody asks you how you got in a mess. I've got to go now. It must be nearly lunchtime. Pity I can't ask you to lunch, but really," he thought, "nobody even believes you exist." "I'll be back this afternoon," Barney said from the door. "Thanks for letting me help. Bye-bye." Grandma and Lou were late getting back from town, so he had time to get the chalk out of his nails and hair and to look fairly respectable for lunch. They were too much full of talk about how they'd spent their day to question him about what he'd been doing. Over the stewed apples, he was able to say quietly, "Granny, have you got any things that you don't want?" "Things I don't want, dear?" Grandmother repeated. "What sort of things? Chilblains? Grandchildren?" "No, Grandma, I mean things like windows and chimneys." Grandma thought about this for a moment and then said that she really couldn't think of anything like windows and chimneys except windows and chimneys, and she thought the house had just enough windows and chimneys. And Lou just laughed and said, "Barney." Then Grandma said it did remind her that there were some tins and jam jars she'd meant to go and put for the dustbin man, and perhaps Barney would be a dear and carry them out to the gate. There were more jam jars than Barney had thought possible, and quite a lot of useful tins, the sort with lids. Barney looked at them. The dustbin man wouldn't say thank you for them, he thought. So why shouldn't Stig have them? He remembered a big wooden box that Grandad had helped him fix wheels on, so that him and Lou could use as a cart. He searched around and found it among the firewood, still with its 4 wheels, more or less straight, and the piece of rope on the front to pull it with. He loaded it with jam jars and tins, and found it quite a heavy weight when he set off across the paddock with it. He looked at Flash the pony as he struggled through a clump of long grass and called out crossly, "You might come and help pull instead of standing there." But he knew that Flash took a lot of persuading to be caught, for Lou to ride him, never mind pulling carts. The pony just stood and watched, tossing his head now and then at the afternoon flies. By the time Barney had got his load to the edge of the pit, he was quite tired. But there was still the problem of getting it to the bottom. He sat on the camel's neck tree trunk. The string was still there. It was the thick brown sort, and he thought it would be strong enough for a few jam jars. So he called down to Stig, and after a while Stig came out backwards like a badger with its bedding, dragging a load of chalk. "I've got some things for you, Stig," Barney called, and he pulled up the string and took the end to the pile of jam jars. About 8 of them were stacked in a cardboard box. It would take too long to pass them down one by one, so he tied the string round the box, took it carefully along the tree trunk, and started to lower it. This wasn't nearly as easy as the carrots. The box swung wildly, the string round it started slipping, the part he was holding tried to run through his fingers and burned his hands. He took a turn around the stump of a branch and let it run out around that, hardly daring to look down and see what was happening. He hoped Stig was not going to get a jam jar on his head. The box was hanging by one corner when it reached the ground, but instead of untying it, Stig disappeared into his den. "Hey, Stig, undo it," Barney called. "There's more still to come." Stig came out again holding what was left of a large, broad-rimmed lady's straw hat with ribbons to tie under the chin. He untied the string from the box and tied it to the ribbon. It made quite a useful-looking cargo sling, Jolly good idea, Stig, Barney shouted. Stig's got brains, he thought. After that, it was quite easy. He hauled up the hat, filled it with jam jars, and lowered it down with the string running round the stump of the branch, waiting for Stig to unload, hauled it up again, and so on. When he'd finished the jam jars, he started on the tins, which were much lighter, and when he had lowered all the tins, he looked at the truck. How strong is string, he wondered. Could he send the truck down the same way? If he didn't, he'd have to trundle it all the way round the top and along the bottom of the pit. He wound the string a few times round the branch stump, leaving enough loose to reach the truck on the cliff top, bumped himself along the tree trunk, tied the string to a wheel of the truck, moved back along the trunk, and pulled the truck towards him by the string. The truck lurched over the edge of the cliff, swung wildly outwards on the string, which ran out so fast that he couldn't stop it, until a tangle of string made it stop with a jerk. The string broke, and the truck was falling through the air. Barney held on for dear life to the tree, with his face against the mossy bark, and shut his eyes. He felt weak and dizzy. At last he allowed himself to look down. He couldn't see the truck at first. Then he saw that it had swung out to land in the branches of an elder tree and was hanging there quite happily. "I've sent the truck down," he called to Stig. "It may come in useful." He was still feeling what his grandma used to call hot and cold all over, but he carefully inched himself off the tree and onto the ground firmly, and set off round and down the pit. A pity he couldn't let himself down on the rope, but no, he thought he wouldn't try that just yet. His idea of sending things down on the string had been a good one, though, he thought to himself as he walked through the copse. Another day he'd have to find some more tins and jam jars to send down. He hoped Stig liked them. They would come in useful for well, things that things that come in useful. Maybe. By the time he got to the den, Stig untangled the truck from the tree and was squatting looking at it and at the tins and the jam jars. And then Barney wondered what they were going to do with them. "These are jam jars, Stig," he explained. "Jam and marmalade come in them, and you can use them for keeping stuff in, like rice and coffee and things like that." But did Stig want to keep rice and coffee in his den? "And these are tins. They're empty, of course, but you get all sorts of things in tins, like peaches and baked beans, and you have to open them with an opener, like this." And he took out of his pocket a tin opener, which he usually carried about with him. It was the sort with the butterfly handle, which you had to turn. And just to show, he fitted it onto the bottom of one of the empty tins and twisted the handle. The opener crept round the edge of the tin. The blade ploughed into the metal at the bottom, and soon the shiny round disc of metal came loose. Stig was fascinated. He looked at the flat round piece of tin which had been the bottom. He looked at the empty tube, which was all that was left of the rest of it, and he took the tin opener from Barney and turned the handle, but he couldn't make it out. "It's quite easy, Stig, look." And Barney took another tin, fitted the opener on the bottom, and showed him how to work it. And there was another round plate and another tin tube. Then Stig had to have a go, and they started on a third. One of the tins had been rather flattened, but it gave Barney an idea of how it might be useful. He took it, left Stig with the others, and towed the truck into the den and along to the place where Stig had been digging at the chalk. There was quite a lot of loose rubble lying around there, and Barney set to work to shovel it into the bag with the flattened tin. It was certainly better than using his hands, though it wasn't quite the right sort of shovel shape yet. He hammered it with an unbroken flintstone and made it into quite a handy scoop, like the sort a village grocer would use for shoveling sugar into little paper bags. He toiled away until the truck was heaped full, and it held much more chalk than the tin bath. Because of its wheels, he could pull it away quite easily. "Look, Stig," he said as he went past where Stig was sitting. "Look at all that chalk I've loaded." But Stig seemed too busy to notice. Barney wheeled the truck along to the place where they were now dumping the chalk and tipped out the load. Then he ran back to the den with the truck bouncing along empty behind him. When he got back, Stig was sitting there surrounded by plates of tin and empty tube, and just in the act of taking the last bottom out of the last tin. "Stig, what are you doing?" exclaimed Barney. "You've spoiled all the tins now. You can't keep things in tins with no bottoms." He was really quite annoyed. What was the use of a load of tin tubes with no ends? Stig sat there playing with them. He seemed to have the idea of fitting one inside the other, but that wouldn't work because they were all the same size. However, one of them that had got a bit pinched did fit in the other, which pleased him quite a lot. Right, I'm going to leave it there and continue on another recording.